In chapter 8 of Ptolemy's Almagest, he describes the motion of the heavens. This is an overview that he provides. Looking forward to later on in his Almagest, he will give a more detailed mathematical description. We're going to stick to just the overview that he provides in chapter 8. The title is, There Are Two Different Primary Motions of the Heavens. So let's talk about these two primary motions of the heavens. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to do some drawings here. So I'm going to open up my sketchbook. And he mentioned first of all that the first motion of the heavens is from east to west. So if we recall the picture of this celestial sphere, I'll draw a circle representing the celestial sphere. And we have the Earth at the center of this celestial sphere. And Polaris is at, let me draw that in yellow. We'll put Polaris as a star at the top of the celestial sphere. And there's an axis passing down vertically through the celestial sphere. The celestial sphere is rotating in the east to west direction around the Earth. So if the Earth is right here, then this sphere is rotating around in this direction. That gives rise to the daily rising and setting of the stars, the sun, the moon, and the planets. So this is the primary motion, or the first motion of the heavens. Okay, and then he goes on to talk about the second motion of the heavens. That is from west to east. So I'm going to need to draw a somewhat larger diagram here to incorporate the kinds of things that he discusses in this on the bottom of page 51. So again, this sphere represents the sphere of the fixed stars. We'll put Polaris up here, and we'll put a few more stars on this sphere to remind you that this is the sphere, the outermost sphere, the sphere of the fixed stars. And once again, I'm going to draw the celestial equator around here, like this. And I'll put an arrow on this once again to indicate that this sphere is rotating around from east to west. I'll draw a vertical line representing the axis of the celestial sphere. And now, let's draw another sphere on the inside of it. You'll see why I'm doing this in a moment. This sphere is attached to the outer sphere via this axle right here. And then we'll draw the equator of this smaller sphere, like this. And this is a sphere on which the sun moves. And he mentions that this sphere rotates not from east to west, but from west to east. So there's a rotation around this axle, just like there's a rotation around this axle for the larger sphere, right? So there's a rotation around this axle for the larger sphere. There's a rotation in the opposite direction around that axis for the smaller sphere. He says the second sphere is that by which the spheres of the stars, in a manner opposite the aforementioned motion, make some movement around poles which are different and not the same as those of the first rotation. So here he's talking about the planets, the sun, the moon are on spheres that are counter-rotating. So that is the second motion of the heavens. And this is typical of the sun, the moon, and the planets. Okay? All right. And so he points out here, let me draw a few other things here to highlight some important points that he mentions. I'm going to draw another band. Let's make this one blue. I'm going to draw another band that is on this outer sphere, and it's tipped at the same angle as the equator of this inner sphere. This band right here is called the ecliptic. And you might recall that the ecliptic, it's fixed to this outer sphere, and it can be divided up into 12 regions: 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And this ecliptic is the band on which certain constellations lie. I'm going to draw a few stars in here. I'm not going to put the signs of the zodiac, the symbols here. I'm just going to put stars on this to remind you that there are certain combinations of stars or constellations, groupings of stars that lie on this band. And if the sun is riding on this inner sphere, well, let me actually make the sun in orange. So here's the sun. The sun is orange in this diagram. If you were standing on the Earth, which is at the center of this entire system, so this is the Earth, and you were to look out at the sun, you would see the sun. If you're standing here on the Earth, if you were to look up and see the sun would appear in front of a particular set of stars. So if this is Aries and this is Gemini, you would see the sun in front of Gemini. And now here's the point, is that as this inner celestial sphere rotates around in the west to east direction, from the perspective of someone standing on Earth, the sun will be migrating through the constellations of the zodiac, and this rotates around once every 365 days or so that the sun moves through the constellations of the zodiac in the west to east direction over the course of the year. He also points out that there are a few important points, and so let me highlight some of these points. I'm going to do these in dark blue, let's say. He mentions a few points. I'll put them right here. Here's the first point, the second point, the third point, and the fourth point. So these first 2 points, call them point 1, that is where this ecliptic line intersects the celestial equator. And that point is known as the point of the, the vernal equinox. So as the sun is rotating around on this sphere in here, at some point it will pass through, from the perspective of someone standing on Earth, from this constellation to this constellation. That is from Pisces to Aries. And when it does so, it will be passing over this celestial equator, and that is the point of the vernal equinox. Point 2, if you draw a circle, as Ptolemy mentions, that passes through the poles of this internal sphere and the poles of the external celestial sphere, you draw a large circle like this, where that intersects the ecliptic at point 2, that is the point of the summer solstice. Okay, so at that point, the sun will be, from the perspective of someone standing on Earth, might look up at the sun, it'll be passing into the first point of Cancer, which is over here. Then, as the sun rotates around on this internal sphere, at some point from the perspective of someone standing on Earth, it will pass here from the constellation Virgo into the constellation Libra, and that is the point. So this is point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, and that is the point of the autumnal equinox. And finally, as the sun migrates through the zodiac, from the perspective of someone standing on the Earth, when it enters the first point of Capricorn down here, that would be the winter solstice. So what Ptolemy is doing here is he's reminding us of the two motions. The first motion is the daily rotation of this large celestial sphere around, and the second motion is the motion of objects such as the sun that on top of the daily motion have a secondary motion that is in the opposite direction that makes them move through the zodiac. Of course, the sun is not the only thing that does this. The moon does this as well, so one would need to have a more complicated diagram involving additional spheres, one on which the moon rides and other ones on which the various planets ride. But you can imagine how those might work in a similar way as this one. So this is what Ptolemy is reminding us of in his chapter 8. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop here, and in the next lecture I want to jump back into chapter 5 and discuss some of the arguments that Ptolemy provides for why he thinks that the Earth is exactly at the center of the celestial sphere.